Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education, featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host.
Hi everyone, welcome to another Tutoring Tips episode of the Prepped and Polished podcast. This is Aaron of Prepped and Polished. Please be sure to check out our website, www.preppedandpolished.com. For tutoring in person or online, call us at 781-753-9951 or chat with us instantly on our website. You can join our Prepped and Polished community on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Prepped and Polished. If you have a question after the show, please ask us a question on the chat feature on our website. We love hearing from you. Now, let's get right into episode number 234, 5 Common Punctuation Mistakes to Avoid on the SAT and ACT. When we look at both the SAT Writing and Language section and the ACT English section of both tests, a lot of times students make simple errors that could have been avoided given enough time and practice, and this is especially true for punctuation. In our episode today, we're going to be talking about 5 common punctuation mistakes to avoid on either the SAT Writing and Language section and the ACT English section. Now, if we are looking at all the different types of punctuation that could appear on either side of the test, either the ACT or the SAT, it is worth noting that this all comes with a grain of salt. You must know the rules and how the punctuation is supposed to be used. If you have particular questions and want to ask us, please feel free to reach out to us directly, and we'd be happy to set you up with a tutor to work on developing these skills to learn these rules and how we're supposed to use certain punctuation given certain contexts. But today we're going to be talking about simple mistakes. The number one, I would say, mistake that a lot of students do is that they forget to read the whole sentence. Don't just limit yourself to the underlined portion. A lot of times if we just look at what's underlined and try and fix that, we're actually making simple errors because there might be something in the ununderlined portion of the text that is our hint that we need to maybe use a second comma. Or we have a dependent clause and you need to have that comma there. Or we have a non-essential clause using dashes. This is a very easy mistake to rectify if you pay attention to the entire sentence. Another error that we sometimes find is students don't really understand all the time about different parts of speech. It's important to know how prepositions, nouns, pronouns, and even verbs affect the use of commas in a sentence. A brief example would be you would never put a comma before I and run if the sentence is, I run to the grocery store. If you put a comma there, you're disrupting the conjugation of our subject and our verb. Usually, again, this refers back to the first point. If you read the whole sentence, that might be able to help you understand. But at a brief glance, if I see something like a preposition followed right after the comma, or the comma's going immediately after the subject, that might be a reason to avoid that answer choice given proper context. Another trap or mistake that students make is that they don't mark out the differences in the answer choices. Now, this is putting a little bit of pen to paper or pencil to paper, and it's really important when you see punctuations coming up in a question, you should just take time to mark out where those commas, semicolons, colons, dashes, apostrophes are being used and where they're not. Sometimes simply finding that all 4 of these answer choices have a comma after this word helps alleviate some pressure of saying, do I need this comma or semicolon here? And I can start looking at the subtle differences between the answers. This can really help in terms of my process of elimination. Another error and mistake to avoid on either side of the test is knowing those certain what I will call unique punctuation marks. The dashes, the colons, and the semicolons. If you don't know it, then you should know it. That's how I kind of view all types of punctuation on the SAT and ACT, SAT Writing Language and ACT English sections of the test. If you don't know how a dash is supposed to be used, spend time learning it. Make that weakness a strength of yours. So then that way, if it comes up, you're not worried about it. Another type of specific punctuation marker that a lot of students sometimes confuse is how they are supposed to use an apostrophe. And granted, it's probably best to work with a tutor one-on-one on approaching this. If you ask yourself, are we doing possession or are we showing contraction? That can sometimes help you understand if you should be using an apostrophe for it or not. A second question is what has the apostrophe? Is it a noun or is it a pronoun? Now, these 5 common mistakes, not reading the whole sentence, not paying attention to the different parts of speech, the differences in answer choices, not knowing certain unique punctuation and a specific example of apostrophes, these are all errors and mistakes that we can avoid with simple practice and application. I highly recommend if you or your student is struggling with some of these to reach out to us at Prepped and Polished. We'd be happy to set up a tutoring session so that your son or daughter can learn about the distinct differences in punctuation so they don't make these errors again on either section of the test, depending on if they're taking the ACT or the SAT. This wraps up our show, episode number 234, 5 common punctuation mistakes to avoid on the SAT and ACT. Please be on the lookout for our next podcast episode, number 235. Thanks for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast today. Now go out there and take control of your education.